Welcome to the Tech for Non-Techies podcast, Professor Abbott.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. This is great.
So tell us rather, where are you a professor and what do you teach?
Well, I have a unique situation in that I'm a professor at two major state universities. I teach at the University of Houston, which is where I started my career at the University of Houston Law Center. And I actually still teach at the University of Houston's Law Center. I've been there for about 20 years. So I started over there and then went out and practiced law for about 5 years in banking litigation at a big law firm. And then was offered a position to come back to the University of Houston as a tenure-track professor, which I did. And I'm still teaching there where I teach law. And I'm also teaching some of starting their analytics program. I also teach at the Bauer College of Business at the University of Houston, where I teach mainly in their management and analytics department. But my biggest part that I'm doing right now is making this huge transition. I've been teaching at Texas A&M Mays College of Business for about the last 6 years in their analytics program. And I've been really working hard on turning that into a data science and analytics and more AI as we're moving in that direction. So I have a unique combination at the moment where I'm teaching in multiple colleges in one university and making a transition of teaching also at another major university in their MS Analytics program.
So you're literally the only person I know, possibly the only person in the world, who teaches law and who teaches data science and artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And so just for everybody, does that mean that you have degrees in both of these subjects?
Yes.
Would you like to confess to the audience how many degrees you have, Professor Abbott?
I think we're on to 12 advanced degrees at the moment. So, yeah.
I don't have enough fingers for your degrees. When you're having to use toes to count degrees, that's really impressive. Awesome. So, okay. It's understandable, obviously, why, in law school, you need to learn law. But why are business schools now teaching artificial intelligence and data science?
I think it's the wave of the future. It's the wave that's already here. So it was a wave of the future, and this business schools that have, gotten on board with this, because some haven't. They're on board. It's a necessary skill. It's not just a necessary skill to be competitive for our students to be competitive and have a competitive advantage when they get out into the workplace, but it's also a life skill. At this point, if you're not data literate, there's going to be a wide divide, in my opinion, from those that are able to understand and use data as for business insights or for everyday analytics, for everyday decision making, and those that have not. And that's where we're going to see this big wide gap, I think, in the future. And so the business schools are realizing this and saying, we need that. This is an additional, just like you need finance, or you need to understand your personal finance to understand your personal finances. You need to understand data. The world is a changed place. We're gathering data in so quickly and on everything. I had a colleague in one of my classes who literally wanted to be off. I don't know why she was in an analytics class, but she was like, I want to be off the grid. I don't want anyone collecting my data. I'm like, well, that's not going to happen. I mean, your cell phone, the Internet of Things, we have sensors. Everything is tracked. Your customer, and some of that is great. Because it allows me to go into a store and make a better informed decision on a purchase that I'm making, because I have a recommender system that has gone through thousands and thousands or hundreds of thousands of other people with the same or similar problem that I have. And they're able to go through that data very, very quickly and give me on my app a recommendation as to which product that I should choose. And this was one of my students that did that recommender system for a big brand. So, somebody could literally go in there with their app and based on her algorithms, pick what was the best product for them. And so, I mean, I think that's where we're going. And so it has great benefit, but it also, I think we have to be teaching it. If you're not teaching it, you're doing your students a disservice.
Speaking of those people who want to be off the grid, I remember there was a guy who was also a professor at a very famous university in the UK, one of the really old famous ones, who was attempting to date me. And I was kind of not entirely sure, but he asked me so many times, I thought, I mean, he might win the Nobel Prize. I'd like to go to the ceremony, so maybe I should give this a go. And I remember, I said, well, fine, like pick a restaurant, like I'll see you there. And he said, I don't know. I don't know. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Use Google, read some reviews. And it turned out he was one of those, I need to be off the grid people. And he only used paper maps, refused to use Google Maps, didn't have Uber. And I remember after one time, I just thought, you're such a weirdo. Like you can't live in the digital age and just communicate with paper.
Right.
So, I'm probably not going to go to his Nobel ceremony. Never mind. So can you give us some examples of the things that your students have worked on in terms of kind of using what you've taught them in the data science field at work?
I have to say, because not just the things that I've taught them at Texas A&M, we're very, very conscious and very, it's one of the only programs I've actually been associated with that is very, very clear on their collaboration amongst the faculty members that teach in this program, that every class builds on the previous class. The classes that are being taught at the same time are interconnected in terms of the projects. So we have lots of collaboration meetings where we sit down. So it really is a we thing, all right? So it's what we teach them along the way and that make these products or make these projects or capstone journey, which is one of the things that I lead for them is their capstone journey. It's a 5-semester project that generally their company will have a business problem or the student identifies a business problem within their organization and then goes about addressing it over 5 semesters. And as they pick up these tools along the way, it's an iterative process. So they're continually to change. And that's part of data science, right? It's part of the, the lifelong learning and being iterative of you take 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 5 steps forward, 3 steps back. It's just kind of the way it works. And so they learn that process and they can take it into their businesses later on. So that's part of, the capstone journey. What's really amazing about the projects is that I think last year we were able to, because we make them quantify their impact. And then we collectively come up with that. It was over $48 million that these 26 students saved or increased in revenue. All right. So combining those, $48 million impact for these companies that these students did projects for. And so some of the projects that we've worked on, we do things like, obviously a lot of customer segmentation. So cluster analysis, they use different, all kinds of different modeling. But for example, figuring out who your customers are. And so one that we worked for a Major League Baseball team, you would think we'd be working with the athletes, right? Because that's what you think about Moneyball and, all these different, things that they're using AI and analytics for. But what we did was we worked with them in they were redesigning their stadium. All right. So in terms of the venues that were in there, and then they were also trying to figure out their ticket sales and how they were doing promotions. So they sent out surveys to their customers, finding out, fans, finding out, who was coming and why, right? Asking questions. And we came up with basically 3 personas of the types of people that really were the ones that we could predict were going to make more money. right? Or they were going to sign up for these different types of packages. So then we could tailor the packages of the customer segmentation to each of those types of people, right? And then the other types we didn't need to cater to as much, because these people were giving, were bringing in what we found, almost 90% of our ticket sales, right? And we didn't know that before. So, and then we also redesigned the food outlets, the entertainment, the things that go on in the stadium based on these personas. And so really an interesting and cool, way to use cluster analysis and, K next neighbor, right? So, one way to apply statistics, because data science is really a intersection of, statistics, computer science, and domain expertise, all right? Whether that be baseball stadiums, marketing, whatever business you're in, healthcare, that's going to be your business domain. And you got to have all three of those. That's where the intersection of data science sits in the middle of that, all right? So it really is a unique, and I'm going to add one more that most people don't add, and that's the lawyers. All right. So that legal part really, especially with the advent of AI, really needs to be part of the data science picture. So it needs to be the fourth Venn diagram that intersects with data science. So, go ahead.
So I heard, when I was just at the Cannes Lions, I met somebody who told me that in their company, so this person works at a well-capitalized Chinese tech company, and they said that they have a product council, which is a job that they had never heard of before they joined this company. And they basically said that now, as part of a product management team, there is an actual lawyer who has deep training in technology, who basically literally sits in the product meetings and says, okay, this is where we can't collect data. This is where, okay, if we are going to collect data, this is how we use it. So there is this new field opening up. But I can see, I can see we've got a question from Dr. Sander, which we'll take in a second. But you mentioned a term that I think a lot of people might not know, which is cluster analysis. Can you tell us what that is to smart business school students or business school graduates who haven't yet done much data science?
Well, cluster analysis is just basically a statistical, is really just basically figuring out, where, if you were doing like a scatter plot, you're trying to figure out where where the characteristics are coming together. So just like a cluster. So you're going to see a cluster of data points, all right, or observations, and they're all going to kind of be around these variables, and you're going to see them break apart, all right. So you're going to have a cluster here, a cluster there, and maybe another cluster, and you start to see them really in clearly coming out in the patterns of your data. So one of the things that's different about big data, as opposed to doing experiments, or what I learned in my PhD program was the classical experiment, which is obviously it's the queen standard, the king standard. That's what you want, all right? You want to be able to do experiments, but with collecting all this data, we can look for trends and patterns in it, right? And the cluster analysis allows us, is a methodology, right? And a statistical program that allows you to start pulling those away. What are the variables, right, that make the difference, so that I can segment my customers into different groups? Does that make sense?
So
kind of
like in, well, I guess I'm just thinking about marketing, advertising, understanding your customer. That's where I can really see that being super important, because then you're saying, okay, how do these kinds of customers behave? So if a customer lands on your website at 2 a.m., what does that behavior look like versus the customer who lands on your website at 2 p.m.? What's the spend? What's the behavior? Which one is more or less likely to return things? Is that kind of what we're getting?
Right. And then what you can do is you can kind of aggregate those into, because you got to be able to tell a story, right? And that's the big, I think that's one of the things that's very difficult for where you have a computer you've got the computer engineer or computer science people, you've got the statistics. And what I see, the people in my program are very technical. They're mostly engineers. They're, mostly coming out of computer science, different things like that. They're wanting to make that transition over to more of the business side, right? Where they're going to be moving up from being the technical to a product manager, or moving up to being, a CTO one day. But in order to do that, they've got to be able to make that translation into a story, right? To sell these things to the executive suite, right? I've got a product to sell it, right? Or I've got to come up with a way. And so the cluster analysis allows you to really start putting these characteristics together and saying, so my customer at 2 a.m., these are my night owls, right? They might be single, they might be 34. I can start looking at those
drunk shopping.
Right. So I can start looking at them and I can give them personas, names, like Family Frank. All right. Family Frank has a family. He's got 2 kids. We can give them a name. We can give them a persona. We're going to market to Family Frank, right? We're going to market to, Yuppie Jane or whatever, right? We're going to find a name for that persona. We're going to give it a personality, right? Our customer. And then we start figuring out by looking at the variables and doing, regression, doing cluster analysis, we can start to see what are the trends for that group, right? So, it's very, very useful in marketing. That's what it's used mostly for, is marketing. So,
well, again, this is what I've noticed, that the most tech-savvy non-tech industry is advertising, because that's advertising and marketing. That's really what's been so disrupted by tech. So, Dr. Sandor, I'm going to unmute you, and then you can, would you like to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Hi, my name is Dr. Marilyn Sandor, and I am a pediatric dentist in Southwest Florida with a tech software startup called Good Checkup, and it's a platform for providing virtual care. And my question was regarding data. If you were putting on your, let's say, product counsel cap as a medical consulting attorney in a company that deals with health data, would you be able to speak to like the current thinking and trends regarding the ownership of data and the fact that so many companies, mostly say in AI or in ChatGPT, are looking to purchase that type of data and utilize it for bettering their own products?
So when you're talking about using AI and ChatGPT to create content, to create new data, to create exactly what are you, because I think this will be a little bit, somewhat the same answer, but also a little bit different.
Okay.
So are you thinking of it creating data, like synthetic data that would not from the data that you already have?
Yes, and also improving like their own functionality. So if they're teaching AI, say for the analysis of radiographs and radiology softwares, they're using patient data that they're obtaining and they're buying it at really like the point of creation. So they're buying it perhaps from like medical industry professionals or from institutions. But what many people are concerned about is that it actually belongs to the patient.
Right. And that's an interesting question. And to be very honest, and we have that, the reason I asked you about the ChatGPT and whether or not that's creating the data or even the content is because right now with ChatGPT and AI in general, the courts are a bit, in the legal field is a bit behind in trying to figure out like, how do we deal with this? Who owns this? And it's kind of the same question, right? Who owns this data that's being created? Is it the software engineer who created the artificial intelligence or the model or the algorithm that's generating it? Is it actually belong to the to the AI? There so far has never been a patent or a copyright or a trademark that has been granted to a thing, i.e. an AI, as opposed to it's always granted to a person, right? And so that's something, in fact, it's written into the statute that it's to a person, not to a inanimate object. So right now we're applying old rules to new technology that may change. So right now they're saying that if it's not a new creation, then it's the person that actually created the algorithm, right, for synthetic data. But it's still, I mean, we haven't really seen any cases, but that seems to be the thought out there. With patients, it would depend on whether or not, and this kind of comes down to your compliance or to your policies as to whether or not that patient has granted you the ability, or that company, the ability to use their data, right? So they would opt in and say, yes, it's okay for you to use our data. And at that point, the company would then own that data, right? Because they've given that right away. We can sell or give our data away if we want to, right? Most people opt for that, but it is a choice that they're making at that point. And again, we haven't seen the cases on this. The legal system is really kind of lagging behind, but that seems to be where things are going. Yeah, it's still a gray area, to be very, very honest. What a lot of companies are doing in the medical field is that they're using synthetic data based on the original data. That way they can actually protect the privacy completely, and not worry about any sort of data breach or data violation, data privacy violation, because they're using, actually data that's created on the real data, but not, it's not real data. It's synthetic.
Would that be just like an analogy? Would that be like taking a screenshot of somebody's like MRI and then utilizing the screenshot and then saying that that was a synthetic reproduction?
No, actually what they do is they're feeding in, it's actually a very sought after skill set. I personally don't do it. I have somebody who does do that, not with medical, but they're taking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of screenshots, okay, as an analogy of screenshots, and running them through, and then creating personas, basically, of patients that would look like these patients in your real data set, but they're not identifiable because they're not real. All right.
Synthetic data, it's like a deep fake.
Right. One of my capstone coaches refuses to use any synthetic data or allow his students to use synthetic data. But I have been reading a lot in Science Magazine and some of the other health journals that this is something that they're like, this is a way to get around the data privacy, because people can revert, even though you do everything you can to protect the privacy, you anonymize the data, there's no recognizable, no PINs or anything, personal identification numbers or anything of that nature, or PIIs, that there are ways to backward engineer it, that you could conceivably, somebody could identify that person, and that would be a problem. So that's what they're trying to get around, and synthetic data seems to be a good solution, but a lot of people, are not willing to use it, for many of the reasons that you just stated.
Is synthetic data basically kind of like a legit way of creating a deep fake? Like, we all think like a deep fake is bad because that's something that's released in the news, and then people believe it and bad things happen. But synthetic data sounds to me kind of like the same thing, but because it's being created in a university for a study, then it's fine. Is it right? Is it like one person's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist? Is it the same kind of thing here?
Kind of, yeah. Kind of. That seems to be the war that I'm seeing amongst the people that I am working with, and the data, because I basically run a team of 10 data scientists that are coaches, and so they're between those two groups. There's definitely factions of freedom fighters and terrorists. So some hate synthetic data, think it's the worst thing in the world. And there's others that are like, this helps us solve a lot of
crucial issues that we would not be able to solve otherwise. So So when students first come in to work, well, to take the capstone, and they've never studied data science or anything to do with that before, what are some of the misconceptions that they typically have?
And I think this is a mistake that a lot of companies make too with data science. And I know you and I have talked a lot about this in our meetings, but I think one of the things that they have a lot of trouble with is they think that there's some sort of a statistical model or an algorithm that's like the silver bullet, and they only need that one, and they're going to solve it, everything, and it's going to happen really fast. They're just going to have this data, and all of a sudden they're going to have a pop out an answer, right? They want instant, gratification. Here's my answer. And that's just not the way data science works. It's not the way data works. And the first step, they usually just jump right over. The first step is identifying the problem, having a clear definition of what is the problem you're trying to solve. And are you really focusing on the right problem, or is there something else, and you're looking at symptoms, not the actual problem. And so that's what we do a lot in the very first semester. What I've been working with them is figure out what your problem is and have parameters around it, define it, get your stakeholders behind it, like ask the stakeholders, is this the real problem? And then start looking for the types of data that you need in order to inform the decisions that you inform your decisions, right? So there's lots of, and they also think there's only one data source or one data set, like the magic data set they're all going to get somehow. And that's not it. There's no, think about the different data sources that might bear on this from very disparate areas and how you might get a hold of those. And then once you do, realize that they're not going to all be in the same format. They're all going to be very messy. I tell them they're going to spend 80% of their time cleaning and pre-processing data before they ever start modeling it. But most of my students, and I see this also in industry, they jump straight to, I have a data set, I need to find a problem in it. And it's like, no, you can't expect the data to give you both the problem and the answer, right? It needs, you need to know what the problem is, then go look for the types of data that might actually answer that problem.
I find that this actually, I think it comes from our evangelism of technology, which, I mean, obviously I run a company called Tech for Non-Techies, so I'm pro technology, but I think we put it on such a high pedestal that we think, okay, like there is some algorithm, like we'll just put in the algorithm and then there'll be an equation and then everything will be fine. But essentially finding out the right problem, that's not a mathematical problem. That's more of that's a right brain situation. That's more social sciences, that's more arts, that's more kind of, understanding potentially the human condition of like what's really going on and delving deeper. And only once you've done the non-tech thing can you actually use tools. Whereas I think now there's like, oh, there are all these tools. Like, it's kind of like, I have a power drill. Let me go and make a hole. Like, do you need a hole?
Right. Yeah. And sometimes they, have one hammer, they know how to use the hammer. And so everything looks like a nail. It's like, no. There's you gotta have lots of different tools depending on what it is you're trying to fix, right? Or what you're trying to do. And I find that to be probably the biggest hurdle that they struggle with. And once they start, when that light bulb goes off, then they're like, oh, okay, I get it.
Well, exactly. A product is a solution to a problem. I'll give you a problem and then you can tell me, is it good or bad? What about if I said, I need to increase profitability?
That's too vague.
Okay.
Yeah. It might be a problem. Yeah. It might be a problem, but you need to drill down more into, right? The lack of profitability is a symptom, right, of something else, right? So I can give you an example from a manufacturing firm. So they are having a cash flow problem, right? So they have tons of invoices out, right? They have tons of, accounts receivable, but they're not bringing in enough money, right? So he's like, well, we're not making enough money. We need to have more orders. I have more customers. It's like, no, your problem is you're not actually, identifying when you're on the phone. You don't have a system of identifying when somebody's a slow pay or a no pay, or which one of your clients. So segmenting your clients into using a cluster analysis or something to segment which clients are good clients from the bad clients, and don't service the bad clients nearly. You're spending 80% of your time on people that don't pay. So your problem is you're not profitable, even though you're super busy, right? So if I just concentrate on, I need to do more, need more customers, need to get more work so I can increase my profitability, I've missed the problem, right? The problem isn't that you're not busy enough or you don't have enough customers. Problem is you have customers that are slow paying and aren't, so it's really your accounts receivable system that needs to be fixed or automated in some way. They're very focused on their profitability. Let's get more business. It's like, no, you have too much business now that's not paying. That's the problem.
No, I think that's a great example. And so I just want I want listeners to really learn your story, because it is, people with 12 degrees in general are rare, especially if those degrees are from, Harvard, the University of Chicago, Wharton, they're pretty good, right? They're pretty selective places. So what made you decide to go from law to basically getting a whole new specialty in a very different and difficult field?
I think it probably started a little bit at the University of Chicago.
Oh, it always starts there.
Everything starts there, yeah. Only because, and I don't know if you, I had Professor Chow as my statistics professor, and that was more than 20 years ago. And he was teaching time series, and he was teaching regression, and he was teaching, all the things that we're just now teaching 20 years later. He was teaching a lot of, even getting into some of the network stuff. And also Ron Burt, who was doing social network analysis and network theory. So I was taking those classes, and to be honest, was very lost, but very curious. Like, this seems very powerful. Not sure what I would use it for in law, but it seems very interesting. And so I kind of went down that road after I graduated of exploring more of the data, and I kept seeing things about big data. And so I kept, wanting to, and then at the time I was in Chicago with SPSS, just taking courses, and they were doing predictive analytics. And so I thought, well, this is quite interesting for hospitality and for customer service. It was very useful. And so that kind of is what led to the journey, but it took me about 10 years to actually make the jump, into that, because I took some, which were all good. I took some sideways. I went into administration. I went into central administration at the university, and was using lots of data in those positions. But I just saw how important it was. I was starting to realize that, okay, there's a shift here. We're moving into a, fourth industrial revolution or digital revolution. And if I don't get ahead of it, I'm going to be behind it. And I don't want to be in that place. Plus, I thought that my students really need to know. So I started teaching about the sharing economy, back in 2013, 14, in my classes, because it was interesting. And, I thought it was a new business paradigm. And so shift. And so I started, that's kind of how I started. And then that led to going to get an advanced degree from Texas A&M in analytics, which then led to getting a data science degree from Harvard, which then led to an advanced analytics degree from Wharton, because it just never stops. It's, one of the things you have, if you want to go into data science, you need to be a lifetime learner. It's continuing. I was on a call yesterday. We're putting together an AI workshop at Harvard. So a couple of my colleagues and I were brainstorming that. And it was really we all felt so overwhelmed, but there's so much coming out right now that trying to stay ahead of it is really tough. It's like a snowball and you're just like running, I gotta catch it, and yeah, so that's kind of how and then I saw
and
how
then
the
you joined
law,
Tech for Non-Techies after Harvard,
yeah,
Wharton, U Chicago. On top of all of that, the pinnacle.
I started teaching at Texas A&M, and I was feeling very overwhelmed with how much information. And that's actually when I found you, Sophia. As I've told you, I think it was January or so of 2020. I don't know exactly when you started, but I think I found you fairly soon after that. And it was like light bulbs went off. I was like, oh, this is the perfect place for me. This is what I need to be helping my students, because they need to understand how to actually translate some of the things that they had in their past, the engineering. Some of them are very technical, but they need to also be able to teach tech, to be able to talk non-tech, right? And have it be such that they can explain it to other people. So it's been super helpful to me. So it transformed my class.
So you mentioned ChatGPT. I'm curious what your thoughts are on you and your students using ChatGPT. I mean, I know the answer, but I'm curious. I think the audience needs to know.
Yeah, I have and I've seen different factions. Again, I work at 2 different universities, one of which has decided to ban ChatGPT from the classroom, the other of which has decided to embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
I teach a lot of Harvard business case studies. These are prone to be thrown into ChatGPT and have it write the whole thing for you. It's what it is. I've been working a lot with David Parks and his use of ChatGPT, and Kareem, who and trying to figure out. So I'm going to be teaching the students how to use ChatGPT effectively and responsibly, because I think that's where the big problem is that people are using it blindly. Let me just throw in some information, and I'm going to take out whatever ChatGPT comes up with. That must be the Bible. That's the gospel truth. It has to be true. No, ChatGPT is just taking a ton of information, and trying to put it all together. So it's like having a million encyclopedias, and it's going through it very fast and summarizing it and giving it back to you. But some of that information could be wrong. And sometimes ChatGPT just makes up stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Like we saw with the not poor lawyer, it was an idiotic thing to do. Basically,
tell us about this case, because it's kind of darkly comic.
Yeah, the lawyers decided to, or one lawyer, associate partner, I can't remember, but decided to have ChatGPT put in the information, had ChatGPT write his all of his pleadings and his brief. And it cited all the cases that he needed or wanted, right? Because as a lawyer, you're looking through, that's what we do. We read and we try to find the needle in the haystack that proves our point, right? So ChatGPT came back with all the most wonderful needles in the haystack you could ever imagine, which should have been a huge red flag. And you never find all the law on point. You have to actually, finesse it, right, to make it on point. So he submitted this brief, and he actually, so the other side, of course, the other side is going to look at every single case that you cite, because they want to, disaffirm it. They want to knock it out and say that this is not what it stands for. So they looked up these cases and they didn't exist. ChatGPT had made up the sites,
not a single one, not one. And the lawyer, said, well, how did you, the judge said, well, how did you double check to make sure that ChatGPT was actually being accurate? Because, well, I site checked all of these. I asked, how did you do that as a judge? I asked ChatGPT if these were real cases. If ChatGPT came back and said, yes, they were. Okay, that's like, why would you do that? That's like, trusting your, I look at ChatGPT as my intern, right? Mm-hmm. I talk to it, I ask it questions. It doesn't know anything, right? It doesn't know anything about what I do. So I give it some context of what I do and why I need the information and what I'm looking for. And then we have a conversation, and it's iterative, right?
he comes back, she or he comes back with something, they come back with something, and I said, well, that's nice, but it's not exactly, and I'm really thinking about this, and this, and we have a conversation, which is what I would do with my law intern. They come to me, they know a little bit about the law, not that much, and I help them with my expertise in getting them to the right answer. And that's the way I'm going to teach ChatGPT in my classes, is that you need to really learn how to talk to it and have a conversation to get the information that you need. And then once you get that information, you need to actually go through all of it and say, and finesse it to make it, because you have the subject matter expertise, right? It's also good for creativity when you don't have any expertise, and it can give you some ideas of where to go. But those you have to be more careful about, because it could make everything up. So.
Well, I chat GPT'd myself, and my bio was about 50% true. And there were some things that could, potentially be true. So like none of it was wild. They're all things that, like, for example, it said that I was a partner in a VC firm, which maybe one day will happen. And I have worked in a private equity firm, and I advise VC firms. So it's not like it said I was a ballerina. So it's kind of that's why I thought it was worrying that, like, obviously I know me, I know what the case is, but it was so close that somebody could have just read and thought, yeah, this is 100% true. You talked about people who want to be successful in this digital age, that they need to have this data literacy. They also need to understand probably how to ask ChatGPT questions, and also when to not necessarily believe it. But in general, what other advice do you have for somebody who wants to have a successful career as a business person in the digital age?
I think that it comes down to one is being able to identify problems, right? It's that one thing that ChatGPT can't do, critical thinking, right? So really, making sure that, I think we need to start asking better questions in general, right? So a lot of times we don't practice that as much. And so one thing that's good about my legal background is that's what we're taught, is the Socratic method. So we're always asking questions, but kind of embracing that continuous learning to be successful in the digital age, because it's going to constantly be changing. So you have got to be constantly willing to read and learn. Also, making sure you're developing that digital literacy, that you're not, I have a lot of my friends that really don't want to look at a graph. They don't want to have anything to do with data. They're running from it. And I don't think you can really do that anymore. You really need to understand that, what data might be able to help you inform your decision to make better decisions and better life choices even. Also being very adaptable and being agile. All right. So cultivating that. Again, developing some analytical skills. You do not need to be a coder. I think that's a fallacy. A lot of my students think that they get very caught up in Python and SAS and, Enterprise Miner and SQL, all these different codes. It's like, there's always going to be a new code, right? Understand how to read the code. You don't need to code. You just need to understand what that might be saying, or what it might be asking. So when you're working with somebody who's tech, you're able to at least understand what they're doing. Also, having kind of that, having the business acumen, so understanding finance, understanding accounting, understanding these underlying traits. And then also really understanding, one of the things that we talk a lot about in the capstone is it's a team sport, right? There's a lot of collaboration. You, as a data scientist, you are not in a position by yourself. You will be working with very diverse teams. You'll have computer scientists, you'll have engineers, you're going to have subject matter experts. You're going to have, the person who is what I would call, basically the data translator, all right, who's going to help you tell the story. This is your team. You need to be collaborative, and work in a team. And then I guess my last one piece of advice is really foster that growth mindset, right? That you can continue to learn, that you can, that, it's not just one answer. There might be several. It's what's the best for the context and situation that you're dealing with. And so having that constant growth mindset is important, because again, you're going to spend a lot of time, going back and forth on how best to solve the problem.
In business, especially I find that entrepreneurship, you don't know what it's not like, oh, there's an obviously good answer and an obviously bad answer, because when life is like that, that's great. You're like, do not go that way, you'll get eaten by crocodiles. Go this other way, you'll be given diamonds. Like, rarely is life like that. Most of the time there are like possibly crocodiles and some lions in every direction.
Right.
You just need to figure out, okay, where are like the lions already fed and tired, so you can escape them. Most of the time, you don't have enough information, you don't have enough time, and you still need to make a decision and essentially figure out how do you pivot back quickly if you need to. But I think that's also one of the issues that I see, was sometimes you can think, well, I just need to gather more data. And you're gathering data and doing analysis. And then it's like, oh, actually, the project's over, the timeline's gone, or we've run out of money, and you're still sitting there deliberating.
Well, yeah, to add on to that, because you mentioned, with the data, something that I would strongly suggest for anyone who's going into this, wants to go into this industry, and if you're in a position where you can do this, is to really concentrate on that, on your quality of your data. All right, the data that's coming in. So anyone who's worked in, actually dealing with data, it is very messy. All right, there's lots of missing values, there's lots of outliers, there's lots of things that you didn't expect. But if you can get that quality down in the beginning with your data governance, that's going to be your data management system. That will be great. For right now, we've got a lot of messy data, right? And being able to work with that and understand that if you can, setting up those systems and processes. I was talking to 2 students this weekend, and both of them were having the problem of there was no documentation, because I'm asking to create a data dictionary. They're like, there is no documentation to any of this data. Like, I'm trying to guess what the variables are. Like, don't do that to the future people. Like, put a data management. Everyone has to have a data dictionary. Why? Because when you leave the firm, somebody has to pick up your project, and they need to know what that is, right? What's in there. And so having a good data governance and a good data management system in the front end, I think will help a lot. So
that's actually really useful for startups to think about too, because at the beginning, you don't have, as a startup, you don't have lots and lots of data. And it can be, I speak from personal experience, it can be really tempting to be like, okay, well, we'll just stick it somewhere and we'll figure it out later. And I mean, to be honest, that was in my last company, that was my approach. I was like, it's fine, we'll figure it out later. And thankfully, my CTO said, no, we're not doing this. Because obviously I was like, look, we need to basically move fast and break things. And what he was saying is that in order for us to build this kind of infrastructure, we're going to have to slow down on the, on feature development. And I was just like, I want features now. But, thankfully he won, because actually when we did have enough data, it was very easy for us to actually create algorithms, use that data. All we needed to do was just add kind of another layer of algorithms on top, and it was all ready to go. And, I had to do my least favorite thing, which is go to him and say, fine, you were right. But,
yeah, no, it makes a huge, huge difference. Yeah.
My last question is about you being part of Tech for Non-Techies, because obviously you, as a non-technical person, you learned a hell of a lot about tech, but then you also became a coaching client of mine at Tech for Non-Techies. And we've been working together for, so first you took the courses and then the coaching a while now. So I'm wondering, what do you think has been kind of the biggest insight or the biggest change for you since we started working together?
To me, I mean, it's been actually phenomenal. I have made such an amazing shift. And I actually, because I still thought of myself as just, not just, I mean, as a lawyer, and I still am, but that's not like just who I am. I mean, I kept falling back on that. And instead, it's like now I've kind of made the whole transition to, I'm really, much more of a data evangelist, with the ability to help answer, and not all questions on legal, obviously, but, that I'm able to now put together the diverse, I make 12 degrees, these diverse degrees that actually are all starting to come together. Because one of the things that you have to worry about, with data and the things that we're doing with society is, is human rights. I mean, there's all kinds of things. So a lot of the things that I studied in law school or I worked with are now coming together in a gel. I don't know that I would have been able to make that transition or that, that jump across the chasm without your help. I mean, and without, Tech for Non-Techies. I just really, I was in a silo, but I had all these other things I did, but I saw them as all separate and distinct. And so I was like, I wasn't even a schizophrenic. I was probably like, if you can be like 4 personalities in one, that's what I was doing. And I was able to, or you were able to help me direct, how do I get all of that? How do I create the intersection, right? I kind of knew it was there. I just didn't know how to do it because I was still thinking of myself as 4 distinct people and doing 4 distinct things. And I was actually keeping them away from each other. So I didn't want them to know about each other. It's like, why am I doing that? And so now I feel like I've come full circle. And I truly believe that the dream of jumping across that chasm and working in, this data, field and in which I am, but creating more of an institute that brings all of these together is very near. And it hasn't been that long. I mean, I've been in this for like for about 5 to 6 years now, and I've made this huge jump.
Huge jump.
I didn't know anything about data. I can remember the first day I sat down in class and I had a Mac, and they gave us a PC, and I'm like, how do you use this? Like, I'm a Mac person. And all the functions were different for data. All the programs didn't work. And I mean, I literally looked like a deer in the headlights. Like, what have I gotten myself into? Where's the quickest exit? And, I stuck with it. And, and it really, I feel like I'm now at that pinnacle of that tipping point of where I can turn this into something really great at either institution, but more than likely at I'm doing most of my work at Texas A&M in this area.
Well, I love hearing your story, and this is why I really wanted to share it with people, because actually it really resonates with. So there's just a new client who's just joined Tech for Non-Techies for the coaching program, and also an MBA. One of the you can probably guess from where. Anyway, so. And we were having a chat, and it's the same sort of conversation of, well, I have this skill set and I really like that skill set and I don't want to say no to it, but also I now know that I need to add on this other skill set. And so how does that work? Essentially, like, there's the old me, which I like, but then there's also going to be the new me, and how, like, do the two of us merge into one, essentially.
Right.
And it's really interesting to have literally just had a conversation with somebody who is kind of at the start of that journey, because that's what I was saying is that, like, I've gone through that journey, you have too. And also I think this is where the world economy and companies are going, because yes, we're speaking about individual careers, but on a company level, it's the same thing, because you see a traditional business, I don't know, like a car maker. You see a traditional business and or I don't know, manufacturing, whatever it is, and they're clearly very good at doing something. Or you can take Burberry's digital transformation, which is a really amazing case study. They were still selling the trench coat that people were wearing in the 1930s. It is still a bestseller, but they completely upgraded the way they speak to customers, the way they engage with people. They were the first luxury brand to really engage social media and e-commerce. And that whole thing of, okay, there is this legacy fashion item that, I don't know, like Prince Philip was wearing when he was courting Queen Elizabeth. And then mix that up with, okay, now people are buying these things on iPad. How does that work? And I think that, like, how do we get all of the different bits of us together to then thrive in this new world? It's an individual question and it's a company question. I think it's a world economy question. So thank you so much for being part of Tech for Non-Techies and for sharing your knowledge and for sharing your story. This has been absolutely fantastic.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed being here.